Something dark is moving in plain sight. What you eat today could blind your spiritual eyes tomorrow. Witches are using foods you trust to control your vision, your faith, your destiny. I was inside their world. I saw the methods, the traps, the subtle poisons. And now, for the first time, I will reveal the 3 foods that are destroying spiritual sight this season. This is not a warning, it is a call to awaken. The first thing witches attack is not your body. It is your perception. If they can dull your spiritual sight, they can delay your destiny. I learned this early in the occult. Before spells, before rituals, before sacrifices, they targeted what entered the mouth. There is a reason scripture says vision comes before direction. When your eyes are dim, your steps become confused. And witches know this. The first food they use is food offered without discernment, not poisoned, not cursed openly, but spiritually programmed through intention. In occult circles, food is never neutral. It carries agreement. It carries alignment. It carries permission. Witches prepare food while speaking words you never hear. Words of dullness, words of delay, words of spiritual sleep. You eat it. And nothing feels wrong at first, but slowly prayer feels heavier. Scripture feels dry. Discernment becomes blurry. Your hunger for God fades. You think it's stress. You think it's fatigue, but it is spiritual interference. This is how they blind without attacking. In the occult, this is called softening the gate. The mouth is a gate. The eyes are a gate. The spirit responds to what enters the body. When food is prepared with spiritual hostility, it carries an assignment, not to possess you, but to weaken you. Witches don't want you sinful. They want you distracted. They don't want you rebellious. They want you numb. A numb believer is easier to delay than a sinful one. I watched witches fast for days just to cook one meal. They believed the effort mattered. They believed consistency mattered. Because spiritual blindness is not instant. It is gradual. First, you stop seeing danger. Then you stop sensing conviction. Then you stop hearing God clearly. And eventually you stop resisting. This food is often given by familiar hands, family gatherings, celebrations, seasonal feasts. That's why it works. You trust the source. You don't guard your spirit. You don't pray over what you consume. Witches rely on familiarity. They know you won't question it. They know you won't discern it. They know you'll eat without resistance. And once agreement happens, the door opens. Let me be clear. This is not about fear. This is about awareness. Not every meal is attacked, but some are intentionally used, especially during spiritual seasons, transitions, moments when God is trying to elevate you. That is when blindness is most effective. I've seen believers on the edge of breakthrough lose momentum after one season of spiritual dullness. Not because God left, but because their sight was clouded. The enemy doesn't always fight you head on. Sometimes he feeds you. Spiritual warfare is subtle when it needs to be effective. This is why discernment must return to the table before eating, before consuming, before agreeing. You must pray again, not religiously, but intentionally. You must speak life over what enters your body. You must cancel assignments you didn't authorize, because which you understand something many believers forget. What you eat can affect how you see. This is not superstition. This is spiritual law. The Bible warns about tables prepared by enemies. Not metaphorically, literally. If they can't curse you openly, they influence you quietly. And the quiet attacks last longer. This is why some of you feel spiritually tired without reason. Why your dreams have gone silent. Why your clarity feels distant. It didn't start in your prayer life. It started in your intake. The enemy blinds by repetition, not force. But here is the truth they hate. One prayer off. Awareness breaks months of spiritual dullness. One moment of authority restores clarity. One decision to guard your gates reactivates vision. You are not weak. You are not failing. You were targeted. And now you are awakening. This is only the first layer, the surface strategy, the entry point. What comes next is deeper, more calculated, more dangerous. And most believers never see it coming. The second food which is used is far more strategic. It is not about preparation. It is about timing, which is study seasons. They track cycles. They observe spiritual calendars more closely than most believers observe scripture. They know there are moments when your spirit is more open, more sensitive, more impressionable. And that is when this food becomes dangerous. This second category is seasonal indulgence foods designed to lower spiritual alertness. Foods that comfort the flesh. Foods that slow the body. Foods that quiet spiritual sensitivity. In the occult, this is called spirit sedation, not sleep, sedation. You still pray, but without fire. You still worship, but without hunger. You still read scripture, but without revelation. You function spiritually, but you do not see clearly, which is intentionally target seasons of celebration, festive periods, times of emotional openness, moments when discipline is relaxed, because indulgence weakens watchfulness. This is not about the food itself being evil. It is about excess without discernment. Witches know something believers often resist hearing. When the flesh is overstimulated, the spirit becomes less dominant. That imbalance creates fog. In occult training, they are taught this principle early. If you want to reduce spiritual resistance, feed the flesh generously. Not to sin, but to relax. Relaxed spirits don't fight well. That's why after certain seasons, many believers feel spiritually off. Not backslidden, just unclear. Dreams slow down. Discernment weakens. Urgency disappears. You start tolerating things you want resisted. Witches don't want you fallen. They want you passive. Passive believers don't confront. Passive believers don't intercede. Passive believers don't see traps forming. I watched witches plan meals specifically for spiritual seasons. Not randomly, deliberately. Foods heavy enough to ground the body. Sweet enough to satisfy the flesh. Comforting enough to distract the spirit. Again, not poison. Not curses. Distraction through indulgence. The danger is subtle. Because nothing feels sinful. You tell yourself it's just a season, just a celebration, just rest. But rest without discernment becomes dullness. This is why Jesus warned about watchfulness repeatedly. Not because evil always looks aggressive, but because it often looks comforting. Witches understand that spiritual blindness rarely comes through fear. It comes through comfort. This food works by lowering sensitivity over time. Not instantly, not dramatically, gradually. First, conviction softens. Then urgency fades. Then discernment blurs. And eventually, warnings feel exaggerated. That's when attacks land successfully. This is why some believers feel disconnected after certain times of the year. Not sinful, just distant. The enemy doesn't need you rebellious. He just needs you unaware. And food plays a role. In occult belief systems, the body is treated as an altar. What you place on it matters. What you consume affects what you perceive. Witches exploit that truth. They don't need to destroy your faith. They just reduce its sharpness. A dull blade still exists, but it doesn't cut. And here is the part that should wake you up. This strategy is most effective against sincere believers. Those who love God, those who pray consistently, those who are growing. Because they don't expect it, they guard against obvious sin, but not subtle dullness. The enemy shifts tactics when believers mature. Heavy temptation becomes less effective, so comfort replaces it. Overfeeding the flesh creates spiritual static, not silence. Static. You hear God, but not clearly. You sense direction, but not sharply. That confusion delays obedience. And delayed obedience creates missed moments. Witches celebrate missed moments more than outright failure, because delay kills momentum. But hear this clearly. This blindness is reversible. The moment you restore balance, clarity returns. The moment you discipline intake, vision sharpens. The moment you prioritize the spirit, awareness awakens. This is not condemnation. This is correction. God is not accusing you. He is calling you higher. This season is not meant to dull you. It is meant to sharpen you, which is why the enemy targeted it. But the third food, that one is the most dangerous, because it doesn't just affect perception, it affects agreement. And most believers consume it daily without resistance. The third food is the most subtle, the most common, and the most ignored. It does not come from a witch's hand, it comes from a system. This is the food of constant consumption without consecration, not what you eat once, what you eat continually. Witches understand patterns. They don't rely on one act, they rely on repetition. In occult practice, repetition creates agreement. Agreement creates access. This third food works because it is normalized, daily, routine, unquestioned. It is food consumed while distracted, food eaten while scrolling, food eaten without prayer, food eaten without awareness. The power is not in the ingredient. It is in the mindset. When consumption becomes automatic, discernment shuts down, which is called this desensitization of the altar. When you stop acknowledging what enters you, the spiritual gate becomes unguarded. You stop asking questions. You stop inviting God into small moments, and small moments accumulate. This is how spiritual blindness deepens quietly, not darkness. Distance. I saw witches celebrate when believers became busy, not sinful, busy. Busy people eat fast. Busy people don't pray over meals. Busy people don't pause, and pauses are where discernment lives. This food dulls your spiritual reflexes. You don't notice shifts. You don't sense warnings. You don't catch subtle resistance. Because your spirit is no longer leading the body. The body is leading the spirit. This reverses divine order. Witches don't need to curse this food. They rely on neglect. Neglect is one of the most powerful weapons in spiritual warfare because it doesn't feel like an attack. Believers assume warfare looks dramatic. It doesn't. It looks routine. This is why Jesus spoke often about awareness, about watching, about paying attention, not because danger is always loud, but because it is often familiar. When food becomes purely physical, the spiritual impact is ignored. And that opens space. Space for fatigue. Space for confusion. Space for lowered sensitivity. This is why some believers feel spiritually drained even when doing everything right. They pray. They attend church. They read scripture. But their spiritual eyes feel strained because awareness has been fragmented. Witches exploit fragmentation. They know a divided focus weakens spiritual authority. This food blinds by scattering attention. You eat without presence. You live without pause. You move without reflection. And over time, clarity erodes. In occult systems, constant consumption is used to keep initiates grounded in the physical realm, too grounded to perceive higher truths, too distracted to sense spiritual shifts. That same principle is now weaponized against believers, not through witchcraft alone, but through culture, speed, noise, endless intake. The enemy adapts, and this is why this third food is dangerous. Because you don't resist it, you normalize it. You don't see it as spiritual, so you don't guard it. But hear this. Your spiritual eyes respond to intentional living. The moment you slow down, clarity returns. The moment you pray again over small things, sensitivity awakens. The moment you invite God in, routine, vision sharpens. Witches fear believers who are present, who are intentional, who are spiritually aware in ordinary moments. because awareness collapses access. This food loses power the moment you consecrate routine. You don't need fear, you need focus. This is not about restriction. It is about restoration. God is not asking you to starve the body. He is asking you to reseat the spirit, because when the spirit leads again, blindness breaks. And this brings us to the final point. The last food is not about preparation, not about timing, not about routine. It is about identity. And when this one is exposed, many will feel uncomfortable because it reveals how deep this strategy goes. The fourth food is not recognized as food at all. Yet it feeds something far deeper than the body. It feeds identity. This is the food of compromised identity consumption. What you allow to define you. What you agree with subconsciously. What you internalize repeatedly. Witches understand identity better than most believers realize. In occult systems, identity is the highest altar. If identity is altered, behavior follows. If identity is blurred, authority collapses. This food is consumed through labels, through narratives, through repeated messages that reshape how you see yourself. You ingest it daily, not through the mouth, but through agreement. I'm tired, I'm weak. This is just how I am. I'll never change. These statements are not neutral. They are consumptions. Witches know that a believer who forgets who they are will never see clearly. Spiritual blindness accelerates when identity erodes, because vision flows from position. If you don't know who you are, you won't know what you're seeing. This food works by replacing spiritual truth with emotional familiarity, not lies that shock you. Lies that feel normal. In the occult, this is called identity feeding. What you repeatedly affirm becomes your operating reality. Witches target believers through exhaustion, narratives, through defeat language, through spiritual inferiority, not openly, subtly. They want you identifying as trying instead of authorized, as hoping instead of seated, as surviving instead of overcoming. This food blinds because it shrinks perspective. You stop seeing yourself as dangerous to darkness. You stop seeing your prayers as effective. You stop seeing your presence as disruptive. That is blindness. I watched witches fear believers who knew who they were. Not loud believers, aware believers. Because identity clarity terrifies the enemy. This is why this food is constantly pushed. Through conversations, through culture, through inner dialogue. You eat it when you accept limitation as truth. You consume it when you normalize defeat. You digest it when you stop resisting small lies. And once identity shifts, vision follows. You stop discerning attacks. You stop recognizing open doors. You stop noticing interference because you no longer expect victory. Witches celebrate lowered expectations. A believer who expects nothing will tolerate everything. This food is dangerous because it feels internal. You think it's your own thoughts, your own feelings. But many of those thoughts were planted not to control you, but to reduce you. Reduced identity equals reduced sight. This is why Scripture constantly reinforces who you are. Chosen, called, seated, empowered. Because identity sustains vision. The enemy doesn't argue theology first. He attacks perception of self. Once that shifts, everything else follows. This is the final layer of blindness. Not darkness. Distortion. You see, but incorrectly. You perceive, but inaccurately. And distorted vision is more dangerous than no vision, because you trust it. But hear this clearly. The moment identity is restored, sight explodes back to life. When you remember who you are, clarity returns instantly. When you reject false labels, discernment sharpens. When you stand in authority, vision aligns. This food loses power when truth is spoken out loud, not quietly, not mentally, verbally, because identity is reinforced through confession. Witches know this. That's why they push silence. That's why they encourage internalization. But you were never meant to internalize truth. You were meant to declare it. This season is not about restriction. It is about restoration. Your sight is not gone. It was targeted. Your clarity is not broken. It was challenged. And now, the strategy has been exposed. No more blindness. No more dullness. No more distortion. You see again. Your spiritual eyes are opening right now. What was hidden is losing power. What was dull is being sharpened. You are not confused, you are awakening. No weapon formed through subtlety will blind you again. Stand in who you are. See clearly. Move forward. This season ends in victory, and you walk in authority.